campus of the Sierra College. She is known for her engaging and entertaining teaching style. Some of her signature classes are on death and on dying, and eco-psychology. She is here today to present The Power of Humor. Please welcome Dr. Kim Bateman. I know we came here to laugh this morning, and we will, but because it's so close to 2013, I do want to start with a prayer for the new year, so if you could join me. Dear Lord, my prayer for 2013 is for a fat bank account and a skinny body. And please don't mix these things up like you did last year. Sounded like a familiar prayer. I'm noticing the snow outside, and most of you were intrepid travelers getting here. I know some of you came from very far away. How many of you were actually here the winter before last? Not last year, but the year before. In case you forgot, that's what it looked like up in Tahoe Donner. Yeah. And do you remember how happy we all were come late June when the deer came back into the yard and it felt really like springtime again? I started this way because I wanted to kind of set up incongruity theory, which is really how a lot of humor works. And that is an actor or a narrator kind of paints a cognitive picture for you. So you have a certain set of expectations, and they take you down path A. And oftentimes there's a repetition. A lot of jokes have 3 different repetitions before you get to the punchline. And at the very last minute, what that actor or narrator does is they actually pull aside that frame to reveal an alternate path. And there's something about being taken down this one path, having that frame pulled, and finding yourself on another path, cognitively, that results in tension. And the release of that tension is what we call laughter or humor. And it's actually a very pleasurable thing that we're hardwired to do. So this morning, I'm going to take you through some of the theory behind humor, and I'm going to use lots of examples along the way. We're going to do a lifespan approach, so we'll start at birth and end at death. We're going to be talking about cognitive schemas. As early as the 18th century, Immanuel Kant came up with the incongruity theory, and he decided that humor was a lot about developing critical thinking. And I'll give you lots of examples of that. In 1905, Freud wrote his famous Humor and its Relation to the Unconscious, and he talked about humor more as a defense mechanism. And what you're going to see is that we tend to laugh about what most concerns us. And so I'll give you examples of that as well. And then some of our earliest understandings of humor actually come from way back, from Aristotle and Plato, who believed it was about delineating in-groups and out-groups. And that's about kind of like who's with me and who's against me based on humor. So humor as hierarchical. And we're just going to touch on that very briefly. And before I begin, and I'm going to show you some things today that may be shocking to you, may be uncomfortable for you, because humor, the purpose of it is to shock, to wound, to reveal, and to conceal elements of human nature. So for instance, if you don't like some of the humor you see today, you might want to just ask yourself, what kind of core belief does that bump up against for me? So for instance, I have this teacher who walks in my office on a pretty daily basis and tells me blonde jokes. And he had one the other day where he's saying, this blonde woman and her boyfriend were going on a trip to Disneyland. They get off the exit ramp. She pulls over on the side of the road and just starts crying and crying and crying. And her boyfriend says, "What's the matter?" And she says, "Did you see that sign? It said Disneyland left." And he tells me these every day, and I'm like, look, do you think that's funny? right? Of course, it bumps up against my own beliefs about that blondes can be intelligent. So let me start with cognitive schemas, and we have lots of these. These are kind of mental frameworks for processing social information. So for instance, when both of my children were little, the first words they learned were dog. But they couldn't say dog, so they'd say, do, and they'd point to the dog. So the qualities of a dog were that it had hair and it had 4 legs. So when a man walked into our home who had a big beard, my son looked up and said, do? And that's the process of that adjustment, that accommodation, that assimilation, where he's saying, this was a dog because it had hair. Is that a dog because it has hair? But that one only has 2 legs, and so you adjust, and that's how we learn. So you're going to hear how humor helps us do that, particularly young in our life. I'm going to give you an example of some schemas that we have pretty well ingrained, one of which is names. So for instance, if I told you you were going on a blind date, and I told you that person's name was Winthrop, tell me, what does Winthrop drink? Martinis, gin and tonic, scotch, tea. What does Winthrop drive? Something foreign, for sure, right? Where would Winthrop be taking you? A fancy restaurant, maybe a polo match. Let's just say that date didn't work out, and the next week I'm setting you up, and his name is Buck. What does Buck drive? Absolutely. What's in the back of the truck? A gun rack and a dog. A little dog? A big dog. What does Buck drink? Beer and whiskey. What kind of beer does he drink? Anything, it has to be domestic. Domestic beer, right? Where is Buck going to take you? I'm thinking the tractor pull. Maybe the monster truck rally. Maybe he has box seats with free Coors Light all night long. Maybe he has a bumper sticker on his car that says, "Women want me and fish fear me." Now, obviously there are Bucks and there are Winthrops who don't fit in those stereotypes, but you saw how collectively, particularly with Buck, we had these ideas about who we thought he was. So those are schemas. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to try to be gender fair here. I'm going to show you one male and one female example of how when you break those schemas, the tension that results from it is considered very funny, and we try to release it. So I'm going to start with my male example here.
You don't lie, mate.
While this next one is pulling up, I want to ask you...
The story of Nadia Sulaiman, the mother of 8 simultaneous babies, becomes more layered every day. It's been reported that she's shopping a video of herself giving birth to the octuplets with an asking price of $1 million. Now, we did not purchase that video. We don't have $1 million.
He's
But we
talking
did
about
manage to get a clip of
Optimum.
it.
You ever
And
heard?
if you've never seen 8 babies born at once before, well, take a look.
You did good, Mr. Lamont. Just breathe. Good, breathe. Now push! Push! I got him more angry!
So what is being violated there? In the British pee break one, and I know we don't even know these rules because most of us have not spent a lot of time in urinals, but they have very strict behavior about how one acts, even spacing between urinals. If you come in, you don't ever stand right next to someone. If you have the option of standing two stalls down, you certainly wouldn't strike up a conversation with someone, much less offer to help them urinate. So it pushes that envelope and points out what it is that our rule is about those things. How about the second one? What do you think about that? What is that violating? Privacy. Actually, poor Shauna, where is she? Is she here? Shauna's up front. When she doesn't know me, and yesterday I was trying to figure out this technology, and I just played the Octomom clip, and she was terrified. She was like, oh dear, because she just had a baby 8 months ago. And of course, giving birth, we think of as a very sacred thing. And you know, the moment when Jimmy Kimmel, or whoever that is, batting the babies, but you know, it stretches our sensibilities because most of us think of a normal amount of children to have as 1, 2, maybe 3 in very rare cases, but 8 really pushes that cognitive schema, and it's very difficult to believe. So the further exaggeration of that is funny. So let's start back early in life. And it turns out that children are very hardwired for this. If you take a banana and you put it under a 12-hour-old baby's nose, they will smile because they are hardwired for that pleasure. Later, it takes the development of abstract thinking to have what we would consider to be true humor. But if you go anywhere in the world, what is the one game that you will see parents playing with 1-year-olds? Peekaboo. So what's the concern on the child's part that is helping with? Exactly. So separation anxiety is the biggest fear of a 1-year-old. And remember, they don't have object permanence yet. They don't know that when you disappear, you actually still exist. To them, you've fallen into an abyss and you will never return. So the whole reenactment of Peekaboo is actually cathartically playing out the terror of loss. And it's amazing that no matter where you go, you will see that. Now, I want to jump a little further ahead because I remember the first joke that I learned, and I was probably 4. And my father used to put me on his knee, and he would do the loudmouth frog joke. Does anyone know that joke? Remember that joke? And it's a wonderful one to perform with kids. And he would sit you on his lap, and he would say, once upon a time, there was a loudmouth frog who wanted to know what all the animals of the forest fed their young for dinner. So the loudmouth frog went out to the elephant, and he said, Mrs. Elephant, what do you feed your young for dinner? And the elephant said, why, I feed my young grasses and such. And he says, does anyone remember the punchline of this? Thank you very, very much. You have to do that with me on the second go-around. So then he goes up to Mrs. Bird, and he says, Mrs. Bird, what do you feed your young for dinner? And Mrs. Bird says, seeds and worms and stuff. And what does he say? Thank you very, very much. Then he goes to the alligator. And he says, Mrs. Alligator, what do you feed your young for dinner? And the alligator says, why, I feed my young loudmouth frogs. And what does he say? Thank you very, very much. And I want you to hear what we're teaching our children when we do that, because the child is saying to himself, first of all, I'm going to distinguish fantasy from reality because, first of all, I know that loudmouth frogs don't talk. Second of all, I know something that the loudmouth frog doesn't know, and that he's really a loudmouth frog and not a smallmouth frog. And so do you hear how it's helping you kind of pull out with abstract thought and examine what you've been given? Very important developmentally. And as we get older, you think about things that concern, say, 3- and 4-year-olds, and these tend to be things like how you get dressed, or the rules for sitting quietly at a table. So if you do something like you put underwear on your head, all of a sudden there's giggles and giggles because you've blown the schema. Underwear doesn't go on your head, silly, it goes on your bottom, right? Or you put socks on your ears and they're like, no, I know better than you, right? And so there's this whole separation, and in that separation you're actually developing intelligence. Now I have to offer too that children often challenge our own schemas, which makes them very funny too. And a story I have about my son is when he was about 4, he was in his car seat. We were going over that dip in the Benicia Bridge, do you remember that? Where you kind of lose your stomach. And he's in his car seat, and he's from the back seat, and he says, "Ooh, Mommy, my penis got a little bit scared there." Which I'm sure really describes it much better than losing your stomach. And I just remember laughing and laughing. We used to live out at Donner Lake, and we were driving home, and I guess a garbage truck or something had, there's garbage all over the road. And he said, "Oh, isn't it just terrible about those litter bugs?" And I said, "I know, it's horrid." And he said, "Mommy, how does something so small like a bug poop out something big like a can?" As you get older, the jokes start changing, and you can imagine if you walk up to a 5-year-old and say, "Why do gorillas have big nostrils?" and you tell them it's because they have big fingers, they will laugh uproariously because most 5-year-old boys are dealing with being told all the time not to pick their nose. Similarly, if you go up to a girl and you say, "Why does an elephant paint her toenails red?" "I don't know." And you say, "Well, it's to hide in cherry trees." And she'll say, "Oh." And you say, "Have you ever seen one?" And she'll say, "No." And then you say, "It works." And of course, again, I want you to hear the development of critical thinking there, because she's going, elephants don't actually go into cherry trees. And the fact that I haven't seen one doesn't mean they're not there. I mean, it's really about developing intelligence. And then we start to see some gender differences in what we think is funny around age 6. And you see boys being much more attracted to, that kind of physical humor. And most of you are familiar with the Three Stooges. How many of you actually like the Three Stooges? 2 of you. One guy in the back. One guy in the back and a couple women. Most girls don't like Three Stooges. It's just not, and I don't know if you remember what it's like. I don't have to play it to you. I mean, they beat each other over the head. They fall down. They're constantly. It's almost like the Roadrunner, where he gets blown up over and over again. And this is, of course, in preparation for later in life when young boys, as in their teenage years, will be taking lots of risks. So this whole idea of risk-taking with your body, playing it out metaphorically through the humor, is actually very pleasurable to boys. But it's not that pleasurable to girls. Girls have a whole different set of language at this point. And theirs is more about pushing social mores. Does anyone remember Miss Lucy, the patty cake game where you'd say, Miss Lucy has a steamboat, and please join me, the steamboat has a bell. Miss Lucy went to heaven and the steamboat went to hello, operator. Give me number 9, and if you disconnect me, I will drop off your behind the refrigerator. There was a piece of glass, Miss Lucy sat upon it, and it went right up her. Ask me no more questions, tell me no more, and it goes on and on and on like this. And you say, I'm cursing, but I'm not really cursing. I didn't say it. And so you're pushing those envelopes, or the fish is a prompt for, what did the fish say when it hit the concrete wall? Damn. Okay, what do you think the main concerns in adolescence are? Image, and ultimately sexuality, attractiveness, menstruation, the onset of secondary sex characteristics, all those things are very much on the minds of our teenagers. And so you start seeing the humor change. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not there yet. I was going to talk to you about the brain. Let me go straight to this. This is definitely boy humor. Caterpillars, we see in the dorms sometimes. And here we start seeing more jokes about menstruation. For instance, what did the maxi pad say to the fart? You are the wind beneath my wing. Or here's, I'm going to tell you one dirty joke today, and I apologize if it's offensive. But, you know, this is the section I am talking about developmental humor. The 7 dwarfs have never seen Snow White naked because they're too short to see in the keyhole and they can't see in the window. So they decide to get together and come up with a plan. And they decide that if they stand, I kind of have to stand out here first. If they stand one on top of the other, the top person can tell everyone else what's going on. So Snow White goes in to get changed. She's in her bedroom and they go running out. They're like, let's do it. And they go run out and they go stand one on top of the other. And the bottom person says, what's going on? And it goes up the line. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? The top person says, she's taken off her shirt. And it goes down the line. She's taken off her shirt. She's taken off her shirt. She's taken off her shirt. Waiting and waiting. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? She's taking off her bra. 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 Waiting and waiting. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Wait, somebody's coming. Me too, me too. So anybody that's interested in what's happening in our brains when we experience humor or something as humorous, it's really our cerebral cortex, or the outer covering, that is processing that. And this is from 5 years old to 20 years old. The warm colors represent the cerebrum, which is kind of more like the mammalian part of the brain. And the cool colors at the end represent the cerebral cortex, which are the centers of higher thinking. So if any of you have gone through a teenager, remember this is teenager right here. And remember the frontal lobe is about decision making. And you say to something like, what were you thinking? And I've said that a number of times. And the truth is, they weren't actually thinking. And I actually had my son turn to me one time when they were throwing rocks at a window of a girl they were wanting to get the attention of, and it happened to be a gated community, and it happened to have an alarm system. So when the cops arrived, here they are with their rocks in their hand, and of course their first response was to run. And the police are chasing them through the woods, thinking they're armed robbers or something, and they did get caught. And I remember that car ride home at 2 a.m. and like, what were you thinking? It's like, He said, Mom, I really wasn't. And he wasn't. I mean, he really wasn't. Oops. Now when we get